Welcome to the fourth season of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories. This is Anne-Marie Zanzel, your host, and I am so excited to share some changes to our podcast that are really great, and I think you'll be as excited as I am about it. First of all, we will be dropping a new podcast every other Friday. This is at the request of our listeners who wanted to hear more. Secondly, my producer, Barb Rollinson, will be joining me as a conversation partner as we discuss things coming out. Barb is a fellow late-in lifer and also the mom of a queer kid, and so she has a lot of insight and experience to share with us. And thirdly, we're going to be focusing also on the beyond. Love to hear your coming out stories, but I want to hear the beyond. Sometimes magical things happen when we come out and we have a life that we could have never imagined. Many of us say this is the best thing that we've ever done. So let's get started. Welcome to the show. Tell me your story. I am so happy to welcome to the show today, John Sovec, a master. He's an MA and LMFT. He is a nationally recognized expert on creative affirmative support for LGBTQIA plus teens and their families during the coming out process. He is the author of Out, A Parent's Guide to Supporting Your LGBTQIA plus kid through coming out and beyond. I like that name. John is a frequent contributor to numerous publications on providing LGBTQIA support, speaks at conferences nationally, and provides training and professional consultation on LGBTQIA plus competencies for community agencies, schools, and nonprofits. In addition, he consults and trains on the corporate level regarding diversity, equity, and LGBTQIA plus inclusion. John is the clinical consultant for the Life Group LA, adjunct faculty at Phillips Graduate Institute, and guest lecturer at Alrint. How do you say that? University? Alliant. I'm sorry. My bad eyes couldn't see the double L. Alliant University in Antioch, California, Cal State, Fullerton, and USC Board of Social Work. In December 2019, he was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to the California Board of Behavioral Sciences. He is a nationally recognized expert on creating affirmative support for LGBTQIA plus adolescents with his work featured on the Ricki Lake Show, OWN, Fox, The Advocate, Bravo, LA Talk Radio, The Washington Post, and columns for Huffington Post, Medium, and Good Therapy. John is the host of OutTalk, a monthly web series for OutCare Health. You can learn more about John and his work at johnsovec.com and gayteentherapy.com. John, welcome to the show. Such an impressive bio.
Thanks. And you're probably wondering, when do I sleep?
Yeah, I'm actually wondering when you're asleep, but I also know as somebody who is not under 50 anymore, that our resumes get longer and longer and longer. I'm not sure where you fall in the age range, but that's me. It's like, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. So I'm so excited to have you on the show, John. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited about conversing about this new book. It's something that's been a passion project of mine. And I just think it's such an important thing to have out in the community for parents of LGBTQIA plus kids and for professionals who are working with them.
So one of the ways I start this podcast is I ask people to tell me your story. And so, John, tell me your story. What is your coming out story?
Well, it's fascinating because my official coming out would have been probably when I was 16 in high school. And I'm one of those rare people who had a very supported coming out process. My family was, not shocked by it. I think there were clues as to who I was quite early. And my friends were incredibly supportive. In fact, it became a kind of a thing amongst them as they were trying to fix me up with people. And what's really amazing is I am still close friends with these people that I went to high school, junior high, and elementary school with. The other facet of this, so I think, so important to talk about, is I would suggest that I knew I was gay probably when I was 8 years old. Didn't
Mhm.
really know what that
That
actually
meant,
meant.
yeah.
But I knew I felt a little bit different than all of my other, guy friends who were, talking about girls and giggling and, talking about the squishy parts and all of that stuff. And I remember my very first crush was a friend of mine, Claude, and he was this kind of like wild, just radiant spirit. And there was just, I had this attraction towards him. And, at 8, 9, 10, you don't know what those attractions mean.
Mhm.
And, I think that's probably when I came out to myself, still not fully comprehending what that would mean.
Mhm. So can I ask you where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles. I actually grew up in the Hollywood Hills, went to Hollywood High School.
Oh,
So
you're an LA kid,
I'm an LA
You
kid.
are a real LA kid. So can I ask, were your parents in the movie, TV industry or anything like that? So that they had a lot of gay friends and all that? Or was it just, you
No,
think I mean, WeHos and you grew up in the epicenter of being gay for a gay man. Um, Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, my parents weren't in the industry at all. My dad worked for a large national clothing company. Unfortunately, it was female clothing, so there wasn't much for me in the closet. But he worked with that. My mom worked as a teacher, and they were just two very regular people who, just found a way to love me for exactly who I was.
I'm really happy for you. And do you think that's getting such incredible support from your family and friends around you, which is quite unusual in our community, um, really pointed you to doing this work?
I think so, and especially the support from my friends.
Mhm.
I would suggest for myself personally, that was really important to me at that time. Because when I did come out, I was one of those kids who was like on student council, and did all the special fun stuff in school, part of, the theater, productions. And so it meant a lot for me to have my friends still be there for me, even as I let them know just another facet of who I was.
So, did you end up going into this? So, how did you end up going into being an LMFT and, you're a licensed marriage and family therapist? So, how did you get into that work? Because I'm going to assume, did that work precede your work with kids and kids coming out and families?
So with that
Or-
question, it's like, so how long is this podcast? Um, let me give you the kind of concise version of that.
Okay.
I have always been one of those people from a very young age that my friends would come to and just talk to me about what was going on in their lives. I think I had this empathic side to me from a very young age. And there was a long and winding path of various different careers along the way. And then I reached a point where I realized I need to actually pay attention to this. And I was
Mhm.
talking with my therapist and talking about, do you believe that I would be a good therapist? And she was like, yes. And
That's
so,
lovely. That's nice to get that immediate affirmation, right?
yeah. And then with her help and the help of people around me in my life and lots of talk and consultation, I decided to just take the step and do it. And it's interesting because actually, when I was in my master's program, what I discovered really quickly is there was very little conversation about the journey of LGBTQ people in my graduate level program. And even less about the work of LGBTQ kids and coming out and what they needed and their support. And so what that awakened in me was an idea, this is something that I really want to do, that I want to be there for kids who are coming out so that they can have a supportive space and their parents can have a supportive space. So I went out, got a lot of deep education, did a lot of consultation, and then really, really worked on creating this as my specialty.
Mhm. So, I have worked with people coming out later in life now for 5 years. That has been my job. And what I have noticed, I would love to talk a little bit about with you is the universality of the experience, whether you are 15, 40, 25, 45, or 75. There are some definite things that happen with everybody that comes out. And would you be able to speak to any of that? I'm sure.
Well, I think for most people, it is the most anxiety producing moment of their life. No matter
Absolutely.
what age you're at, there's this, and no matter how affirming or supportive your friends are, there's this moment inside of all of us as we come out where our heart beats fast and our palms are sweaty and our body gets cold. And we're really, really anxious about sharing this story with anybody. And I think for lots of us, it's because we've been told these stories of rejection. And we've been told, as a minority, we are outside the norm. And so that's going to bring up anxiety in anybody, no matter what age you are when you're coming out. And that anxiety can be debilitating for a lot of people. And I would imagine in your conversations, assisting people in coming out, it's sometimes just about addressing that anxiety first, and then helping them create the message of how they want to come out, and then creating the support for the fallout of doing that.
Hmm. And I find that I have always said this, and you may disagree with me, is that when people come out later in life, there's a lot of grief involved because a lot of times there's a lot of loss and loss of identity, loss of marriages, sometimes loss of children and family and all those things like that. And what I have often noticed that the difference between, I find that what I say the difference is for sometimes for young people, it's the grief, the grieving of the loss of the future of they thought they were going to have. While for older queer folks that come out, it's the loss of not only all the things I mentioned before, but also the loss of like their queer youth. Like they didn't get to experience a lot of the things that people, my wife's been out since 1985. She's experienced, she had that life. I did not. And so there is that sense of loss that I always say paired with this sense of joy. So I always talk about coming out as this experience of holding two opposing emotions at the exact same time, which I think we do more than we talk about. But, I have found that, I was holding this incredible joy with this incredible experience of grief and loss because I lost a 27-year marriage and, or I left a 27-year, I don't want to say lost, but that marriage ended and it was, I grieved that. So with kids so much, besides, the anxiety, what else is going on for youth when they're coming out?
So there's a lot of thoughts I have about everything you just shared. So let me try
Oh,
and unpack it one thought at a time.
okay. I'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes up for me is this idea. It's not just holding about two opposing thoughts. It's actually about holding thousands of thoughts in our
Mhm.
brain at once when anybody at any age is trying to come out. And that is what causes so much of that anxiety. And another thing that I work with people on all age spectrums who come out. I have someone recently who came out in their mid 50s.
Mhm.
And you're right, there are layers of grief that play out for everyone. The one thing we find though is for people who come out in later in life, and I don't know if you had this experience, but oftentimes there'll be a developmental adolescence that actually takes place as they give birth to this new queer identity.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. We actually call it our second adolescence within the community.
Mhm.
And I sort of argue that no, it's actually a first one because we never really had a first one. Because when you're trying to fit into compulsory heterosexual norms when you're young, you're just sort of doing what everybody else is doing and not really exploring and what you desire and what you want. So besides that, so what are some other things?
Well, and then also you talk about the grieving process. And
Mhm.
this is something I talk about in the book, and I talk about with families, I talk about with kids, I talk with anyone who is looking to come out. There is a process of grieving. But what I tell people, it's not a parent grieving that their kid is gay. It's actually grieving the idea of the dream they had
For
of the
their
kid
child.
when they were born. So most parents, they have birth, they get the kid put in their arm for the first time, they look into its little eyes and they project forward an entire lifetime for it, where it's going to be, the captain of the football team, head cheerleader, a valedictorian, go away to college, become a doctor, and then buy the house next door and put up a picket fence and have grandkids and golden retrievers and all of these pieces of the puzzle. And when their kid comes out, that dream gets shattered. I
Mhm.
think it's so important to share that process with parents and give them some space to actually grieve that dream so they can then open up and realize that their kid can still have all of these amazing things. It's just going to play out differently than they imagined.
than they expected.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I always have said that too, and I think that's true with a lot of, when our kids don't follow the expected norms, no matter what it is. Like I have had friends who have had children that are special needs and grieving what they thought this child's life was going to be. And as a mom, my second child came out as non-binary, and now they call themselves trans. And even though I work in this space and I was super happy for them, not surprised at all, it was really hard because I was grieving the child that I once knew. And now they use they them pronouns. Now they are going somewhere else. And so for example, small little example, when people ask me how many kids I have, I go, I have one daughter, one non-binary child, and two sons. And, you know, I agree. I miss saying, the easy, oh, I have two of this and two of that, but it is one of, as a parent, that's one of those things we don't talk about a lot, is like, even though I'm fully supportive of this child, I still grieve the fact that the expected norms that thought they were going to follow, even though they were post-college, they're not going to do anymore. And so
Yeah.
it was really just, it was a tough feeling, and I was
And
sort of like upset with myself for having that feeling, but I know
that's
better.
the thing though, is I actually want parents to know that this is going to be a process,
Hmm.
because it gives you a space to go inside and look at your own feelings, your own emotions, what you're going through. And for all of us walking through the world, we do have to check in with ourselves on a constant and regular basis. The other thing I do too that I think is so important is I also let the kids know, like, look, you and I have been talking about this for a while. You've been processing this for a while. Your parents have just been informed. Can we please give them some space to go through their
Yeah.
process? And I think it's important for the entire family to know, because coming out is a family process. Yes, your kid may be the one who puts the pebble in the middle of the pond, but that pond then ripples out and influences parents, it influences siblings, it influences extended family, it influences your family's experience of being out in the world.
Hmm.
And so I think it's so, so important to give a space to process those emotions, so then you can work with them, be present with them, move through them, and then be the most powerful and supportive parent you can be.
Yes, absolutely. I also think that, when people are I always talk about that with my clients as well, because a lot of times my clients, it depends, sometimes people, it just sort of hits them out of the bolt, like they never ever thought they were not straight. Because that's where I start with my clients, is like, we just start with, hey, I think I may not be straight. That's like where we start. And what I have found is that I have said the same thing, is that, we have to give our families sometimes some time to adjust, because it may be something we may have been thinking about for years, but for them, this is new information. And so sometimes when it's my clients telling their parents, just like yours, um, that a lot of times, their parents aren't, can be super acceptive, or upset they're getting divorced from their spouse, all those things like that. And so, giving people some time to adjust to the new information is, I think, really critical and really key.
Yeah. And one of the things that can come up sometimes too, I would imagine, with people you work, like their spouses and the people around them, is this question of, what did they do wrong? I
Mm.
get this from parents. And first of all, I appreciate that they're willing to be this honest with me.
Hmm.
But the thing that I move into very quickly is this idea. So, in the process of questioning if you did something wrong, that's actually sending out a message that you believe there's some damage that has been done to your child by them being LGBTQIA plus. And
Hmm.
we need to dive into that question to move through it. Because ultimately, as a parent, there is nothing you can do right or wrong that influences your kid's sexual orientation or gender identity. It is a facet of who they are. And
Mhm.
that is such an important piece of the puzzle for all the people surrounding the person coming out to understand it is not about you. It is actually about this person blossoming, opening, bringing their authenticity into the world. And let's support that, because what a beautiful thing to be included in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you say that it's not about you, because so many times people will come out and the person they're telling makes it all about them. In my community, a lot of times people will come out, and my wife always said this, she goes, "You need a full embrace." And I was like, I didn't know. She goes, "You're getting a lot of half embraces." And I had no idea really what she was talking about until I got a full embrace,
Mhm.
because a lot of times when I came out to people, they would be like, "Oh, how are the kids? How's Jim?" Who's my ex-husband. And I'm like, well, it's not about, but it was such a journey for me. And then at first I had to answer all those questions. And then I started to get tired, and I wondered why I was tired. And then when I told my youngest son's youth group leader for church, and I was telling her what was going on, and she goes, "Oh, Anne Marie, I'm so excited for," she was 30. "I'm so excited for you. I'm happy for you. That's such great news." None of the other questions. And when you give your child a full embrace, because I often hear parents say, "I love you no matter what." Like you
Mhm.
robbed the grocery store and you're in
Yeah.
trouble with the police. So I really appreciate what you said, that it's a joyous and actually a celebratory thing, but and not something with like, "Oh, what did I do wrong?" Because your child is wonderfully and perfectly made, no matter what.
Yeah, and riffing on something that you just said too as well. I actually push against the word acceptance,
Hmm.
because what I hear the word acceptance, if you really look at the meat of the definition of it, is like, I know there's something wrong with you, but I'm
Hmm.
going to be the bigger person and be okay with it. What
Yes.
I encourage, and you'll find it throughout the book, is I use the word affirm, love, be present with. These are ways that we can give that full embrace you're talking about. So it's not a question of you're damaged and I'm going to bring you into the fold. It's more about I see you and I hear you and I want to be present with you. And the number one thing I tell every parent in the book is when your kid comes out to you, the first thing you are to do is to hug them tight, hold them tight, and tell them, I love you. If you can bring that moment into the process, you have set a foundation that's going to open up so many doorways in the future.
Okay. So my question is what if, I'm sure there are parents that buy your book when they're like, "Oh, I am messing this up so bad." Like, and I have kids, so I've messed up plenty in my life. I am messing this up so bad. So a parent buys your book, they're reading it. What you just said is perfect and exactly what you should do if you can. And what if the parent is like, "Oh my goodness, I've made some mistakes. Like I shouldn't have said that, or I should have done this." What do you advise parents when they need to sort of maybe backpedal a little bit on how they've been reacting to the whole experience?
Well, first off, welcome to being a parent. You are expected and invited to make mistakes. And the thing is to take ownership of those moments, is to be willing to say, hey, I said something recently or even a while ago, and I now have learned more. And I want to come forward to you and let you know this new information I have. Make these moments not about you. Oh my God, I messed up so badly. I'm so sorry. I'm the worst. I'm the awful. Because that does, it makes it all about you. Instead, be, hey, I learned something. I read John's book. I now realize this is what I really wanted to communicate to you when you came out, or this is a way that I want to support you as we've been working through this process together, and be there to start that affirming conversation again.
Mhm. John, do you work with trans kids, I'm assuming, as well?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Um, how is that different for families? Um, from like a cis kid coming out as, as gay or a lesbian or bi or something like that. How is that different is it different for families? And what are the best practices that people can do to love their trans kid for who they are?
Mhm. I believe that it is a slightly different process. And
Mm-hmm.
here's why. What I find from most parents that I work with is a kid coming out about their gender identity questions the whole fabric and the history of the family. Oftentimes when kids are young, they're named because the parents are making a salute to someone in the family or choosing a name that they feel powerful about. Or they've just picked up that baby book at the grocery store and picked out the ones in the R section. But there's been this assignment. And then remember, we learn about gender from our families, from our communities. And so when, as a trans non-binary kid, you come out, you are pushing against all of those social constructs that your family has designed around you. So it can be really challenging for the kid, and it can be really challenging for the parent willing to unpack all of those ideas of gender that they have placed upon their kid and to open up to new possibilities of gender. All the time I hear questions from parents like, oh, why are there so many different names and this and that? And why is everyone exploring their gender nowadays? And I push back and say, I think it's amazing. I think it's exciting. When
I do
we
too.
all grew up, it's like, hey, are you male or female? Tick
Or,
the box here.
hey, are you gay or, are you gay or lesbian? I mean, are you
Right.
gay or straight? I mean,
Yeah.
that you chose a team and that's the team you were on.
Yeah. And the thing that's so beautiful is kids these days are asking these deeper questions about gender and sexual orientation. They're not just willing to accept this binary that adults have handed to them. And
Hmm.
I think there's so much beauty and power in that. And I try and help parents see that. And there are layers to a trans non-binary kid coming out. Initially, it's more of a conceptual thing. But then when we start moving towards pieces of social transition, a kid wanting to live in their affirmed name, their affirmed pronouns, their affirmed genders, we hit this first speed bump along the way. And for me, it's important to guide parents through that to create a space where they are willing to support their kid in that journey. Yes, there are going to be questions of safety depending on the community they're in. But that's where opening these conversations can be a space where you can help your kid manage those problems and those challenges. The biggest hurdle we do is when we hit pieces where a kid wants to go into some type of medical transition.
Hmm.
Now, we're in a world right now where there's lots of fear mongering and hate language about medical transition. And what most people don't understand is for a lot of trans non-binary kids, the first piece of that is simply going to be gender affirming hormone therapy.
Hmm.
And if we look at younger kids who are pre-puberty, they're going to be going on puberty blockers, which are such a valuable piece of this transition because they allow kids to only have to go through one puberty in their lifetime. Now,
Absolutely.
I don't know about you, but puberty, whew, it's not a fun thing to go through.
Yeah.
So
No.
I
Actually,
want,
I've been through adolescence twice.
uh-huh.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
get
could you
it.
imagine going through the physical experience of puberty twice? Yeah, it's a painful thing. So puberty blockers can really help with that. Also, too, when we move into gender affirming hormone therapy, what we're doing is helping a kid to align their physical presence with the essence of who they are inside. And the fear mongering is all about these mutilation surgeries. We
That
have to
doesn't
understand that
happen.
most trans non-binary people may not choose to actually move into surgical modification. And those that do often do so after they're 18 when they're adults and they're making these choices differently. And so if we look at the actual storyline of how this works and you can help parents understand that, it's going to alleviate a lot of their fears that are going to come up in this process. Because what's the number one, well, actually number two thing that you as a parent probably do? You love your kids, and then number two, you want to keep them safe. And so we
Mhm.
come into this medical stuff, that's where parents' heartstrings get pulled because we're doing something to my kid's body. And by creating an informed process, it allows them to then join their kid and move and be part of the support team.
I have some questions because of what's going on in the news. Um,
I have lots of thoughts about what's going on in the news.
well, as a mother, I am horrified that the government, well, they may try to make all kinds of decisions as a woman too, but as a mother, I feel like it is so horrifying that the government is trying to make decisions about um, a parent's choice for their child and entering into the medical room, because that is none of the government's business.
Mhm.
Um, I have had several trans friends that have left states that have become very dangerous for trans folks and trans kids. If you were talking to a trans parent right now who has to think or consider leaving their state because of what's going on, what is your biggest piece of advice for them?
If you have the financial ability to do it,
Leave.
move.
Yeah.
I understand that it is a big process, and some families may not have the financial means to be able to do this. But what we're seeing is already with so far this year, when we're recording this, there are over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills up in different states around the country. Over 220 of those are anti-trans bills. And we need to understand that this is becoming a very dangerous time, especially for our trans and non-binary community. And the other thing that's happening with this is kids, because of social media, because of their awareness these days, are seeing all of this messaging that's being put out and telling them that they are less than, and that they are awful, and that they are not part of a community, and you're being rejected, and you're evil. Kids don't have the ability to process this. We are seeing our suicide rates amongst LGBTQI plus kids rising dramatically. It's really fascinating because we had been doing really well pre-pandemic with the direction, the support that was moving around in
Yeah.
the world. We're finding that we are creating more affirming spaces, more affirming schools. And now we've reversed that because of a previous administration and what's going on now in the world. And so these suicide rates are rising dramatically. And that's a thing that I think parents need to understand when you're facing this, do we move to support our trans kid? Is there is a high likelihood that your trans kid, I think it's up to 41% trans kids will attempt suicide, not think about suicide, but attempt suicide. And then if we look at trans kids of color, those numbers are even higher.
Hmm.
Your kid's life matters. And if the only way they see of dealing with the pain that they're experiencing in their world is to take their own life, you need to be aware of that.
And also too, for children, like, to make that move for your child, even though it's difficult and it's hard. And there are now organizations springing up to help trans folks move. Actually, while you were talking, as Lazarus, who's a friend of mine, I, I see the message and I'm like, oh, Laz must be know we're talking about trans folks right now, because he is helping, move people, because he is in the state of Missouri. And
Mhm.
so he's helping, he's trans and he's helping trans folks move. And so what I was thinking is that, you know, there is, even though like these horrible things are happening, and I think it's so, if you move for your child, it shows them that they are valued and that they matter and they are worth moving, so that they are safe and are in a state where this is a non-issue. I'm a little worried because, anyway, we don't need to get into all that, but that moving in a state that's truly a non-issue. There are states that are adding more affirmative stuff, gender affirmative care for trans folks and stuff like that, and not taking them away.
Mhm.
So, um, one more question about, what if you are a parent and you're like okay with everything, but your spouse is not? I'm sure you talk about this in the book. How do you navigate all that?
Well, first of all, usually the spouse that's affirming has read my book. I encourage them to hand the book to the non-affirming parent.
Hmm.
Oftentimes our opinions are based on fear. And if a parent's job is to love their child, we said love first, safety second,
Hmm.
then creating information channels that will help that fear-based story be released a little bit is one of those first steps that can help. The other thing too is for parents to make sure that they're getting support. so that they can look at attending, a local PFLAG meeting, or if that's not available, finding one online, to create spaces where those fears can be heard. And remember, a lot of the stuff that we learn about who the queer community is are based on things that are salacious and are fear-based. And if we look around and really try and find those healing and healthy stories, such as a lot of stories you've told on your podcast here, that those are really important places to help someone move through their fear. And I have to be honest, I say this in the book as well. If you have a spouse and it feels like it is dangerous for your kid to be supported in the household, you may need to look inside and make some serious decisions there as well too. Um, do you need to find ways to keep your kid safe, moving in with parents, moving out? If those are possibilities and it's that extreme, I think it's really important, because the number of homeless youth on the streets who are LGBTQIA who got kicked out of their houses is enormous. And I don't think any parent really wants their kids ending up on the streets.
Again, breaks my heart that that happens to people. And I know Trevor Project has been keeping the statistics about kids. And yes, I've read that suicide is up among LGBTQ youth, which is truly, truly heartbreaking. So when should a parent go and buy your book? Like, unfortunately, kids never, often don't give us any warning. And how, yes, when should they go buy your book? I mean, like, when is the best time, the optimal time? And it's never too late to buy it even,
Yeah.
right?
I would say the perfect time is when you give birth to a child.
Ah, that's a really good idea.
Because here's the thing, kids at a very young age figure out if their family is affirming of LGBTQI people, whether it's kind of overt things of like messages of we hate that community, or smaller things like, oh, there's a news item about, queer people, let's change the channel, that they pick up on this information. And it's really, really fascinating. There have been studies have done that look at how young kids actually figure out if their household is affirming or not. And we're looking at kids as young as 4 or 5 who are picking up those messages. And remember, we may be exploring our gender identity and sexual orientation at those really young ages. And so it's important for parents to understand that. So for me, if you're going to be a parent, pick it up.
I
Next
agree with
stage,
you.
next stage is adolescence, because when puberty sets in, that's when most of us in the community start really understanding who we are and how we want to present that in the world. Yeah, and if you realize that if your kid comes out to you, go to Amazon and just order it. Then it'll be there in less than 24 hours, or it'll be immediately if it's on Kindle. And you are right. For parents who feel like maybe they haven't taken all the best steps along the way, find this book. It will help you.
Well, ironically, John, so many of the things you're saying is actually really good for people who are coming out themselves, because like I do mutual support groups, and in some of the groups we do is we have a worksheet in which what were the message you were told about being gay when you were young? What language did your family use? And what people have come to find out is that there are people that grow up with super homophobic persons that use slurs and it's just awful, but it's often more subtle than that. And, like, there's a lesbian couple that lives next door,
Mhm.
or something like that. So I'm going to go out and get your book. And I'm going to argue that I bet my folks that are coming out later in life could really, just use these practical, because so much of what you've said today, I've thought about or have talked with other people about. And so that really goes back to this really universal experience, no matter what age you are.
Yeah. And I think there's something that we as people in the LGBTQIA plus community can also do, is when we come out and we feel affirmed in ourselves and we feel the strength in that identity, is be willing, if it feels safe, to be open about that.
Hmm.
My husband and I are very much open about who we are as a couple. Even at the gym, like we took a spin class last night and I was heading home and he was going to stay and work out a little bit more. We kissed goodbye right there in the gym.
Hmm.
So this is not the quote unquote putting it in your face. It's
God, I
about
hate that.
actually trying to express this idea that we are a beautiful, loving couple. And we're just saying, but goodbye, I'll see you later. And we always say, I love you when we separate like that.
Hmm.
I think that's powerful. I think it's
Hmm.
beautiful when we can just be the couple in the neighborhood. And when the kid next door has that Thanksgiving pie sale, they come over and ask us if we want to buy a pie. That we're not this salacious, scary thing, but we're actually part of the fabric of our community. And that right there is usually where the biggest amount of change can come. Yes, we want the government to create supportive bills. We want Title IX to step in and protect LGBTQIA plus kids in schools. But by us living proud and open lives on a grassroots level, if someone knows who we are as queer people, that's how we're going to make change start to flood over this country.
I absolutely agree because my wife and I are pretty out. So it is generally very good. You're gonna laugh at this. So when Tanda and we were first dating, I was just out. This was like 6 weeks into our relationship. And we go to a lesbian bar and we kissed or something. This little drunk girl comes up to us and says, "Oh, I just want to be like you guys." And we laughed. We've been together like a couple of weeks. We were like, yeah, okay.
The universe was just giving you some information saying, hey, by the way, this one's going to last.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, I would love to hear what your coming out song was. Did you have one?
So for me, my favorite like coming out energy is it's an odd song, but it's a wonderful song. It's Believe from Cher.
Oh, yeah.
Because I do believe there's love after all of the things we go through, after all the moments, whether it's a breakup, whether it's being separated from our family, whether it's being torn apart inside. Let's believe in love. It's there for us. And, if you put it on, you have to dance anyways. And
Yeah.
why not?
And of course it's Cher.
Why not?
Why not? So a book or a movie that sort of just took your perspective and shifted it.
So there is an E.M. Forrester book called Morris. It's spelled Maurice for us Americans, but it's pronounced
Mhm.
Morris. And there was a movie made out of that quite a few years ago. And it is a really beautiful idea of exploring how we need to live authentically. In the course of the movie, a gentleman who knows he's gay, this is, I think, Edwardian England, like the status of it, like locks him down a lot of ways. And he falls in love with a stable boy and then denies that. And then at the end, happy ending, runs away with the stable boy. But it was so beautiful to watch that this conversation of social pressure has been on us for years, and that when we push against it, we can actually find our true, beautiful, affirmed, loving, kind selves.
Amen. Um, so how would you describe your life today? It sounds like your work is incredibly meaningful to you. Is it like, it's your purpose?
Yeah. I was one of those people from very early in life. I actually got messaged to understand what my purpose in this lifetime was. And it's a simple one, it's to heal.
Mhm.
And oftentimes that energy is directed to being there to help others to heal. But it's also been my journey to heal myself in this lifetime. And it's been a really powerful, wonderful experience. And if I were going to describe my life right now, I would say it's passionate.
Mhm.
Whether it's coming here and talking with you today or going to see a music concert, my husband and I are music freaks. We will see anybody singing anywhere on a stage. It's just our passion. It's what we
You
love
got to
to
come
do.
to Nashville then.
Oh, I lived in Nashville for a little bit,
Oh,
actually.
really? Oh, I live in Nashville.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so that passion, it's also the passion about like I planted my vegetable garden. It's the passion about I love to bake. It's the passion about my husband and I as sexual beings in the world. I think passionate is the best word to use to describe my life right now.
Sounds very joyful.
I'll live in that.
You'll live in that. Well, John, how do people find you if they hear this podcast today and they're like, I got to talk to this guy? How do they find you?
So some of the best ways are to go to my website, which is johnsovec.com. That's SOVEC. If you're a parent, you can find more information at gayteentherapy.com. And of course, go to your local bookstore or go on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of those booksellers online, and you can find my book Out, A Parent's Guide to Supporting Your LGBTQIA plus kid through coming out and beyond.
Thank you, John. And thank you so much for all the work you do. It is truly, truly important work. And I'm so glad I had an opportunity to interview you today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.